Remember the 1st of January or the 2nd of January? For me, this year began with huge news online. I'm sure everybody here noticed it. Some huge CPU vulnerabilities were published. And my first reaction was, oh my God, what to do? Do I have to throw all my computers away? Are all my CPUs here vulnerable? So for example, is this AMD Sempron CPU here vulnerable? Yes, it is vulnerable to any kind of Spectre attack, or at least to most of them. Is this Intel i5 vulnerable? Yes, it is. So I went to the basement to look into my old computer stuff and see if I can find a CPU that's not vulnerable, because I really wanted to make sure I'm not the victim of some Meltdown or Spectre attack. And I found this one. It's an i486 from, oh my God, 98, the year I was born. So I don't really can use this. So what happened so far? In January, these attacks become known. In February, there were the first reports of malware that already experimentally tries to exploit these vulnerabilities. And we didn't have, by that time, proper mitigations available and stable, in a stable way. So the rest of the year, a bunch of other vulnerabilities occurred. So all of them are based on the same idea of speculative execution and hyperthreading. The features that make our CPUs as fast as they are today. Otherwise, we would be back in the 90s. And right here when I came here, I had to adapt my slides because another exploit was found. It has not yet a name. It's familiar to Spectre, and I haven't had time to look into it. But we do need to expect more such vulnerabilities in the next few years. So I really think they will accompany us for a long time, because that's of their nature. They're hardware attacks which cannot be easily fixed by software. So what is the impact? What can we do? What can attackers do with these vulnerabilities? First of all, they allow to extract arbitrary data for local attackers. That's not such a bad thing, because you still need to have local code execution on that machine. But there are proof-of-concept exploits which exploit these attacks and these vulnerabilities from JavaScript. So when you go to some websites, it's pretty easy to inject some code by just buying some advertising stuff, and people load their JavaScript code. And worst of all, there's a proof-of-concept implementation that shows we can extract data via CPU vulnerabilities via the network. So really remotely, that's possible. So, oh my God, can we trust the memory? Can we trust our CPUs? Or do we have to go back to this old 486? Who can feel safe? Well, literally and practically nobody using modern computers, because all of these computers use speculative execution and hyperthreading techniques, which make them so fast, but also in terms of data disclosure insecure. Because it's hardware, we're dealing with hardware vulnerabilities. Any operating system is affected, and any kind of computer, because most of them use ARM, AMD, or Intel chips, or whatever. But even newer architectures like RISC-V are vulnerable to Spectre attack. So the only thing we can do is we can't really trust the memory. So don't trust the memory. How can we fix CPU vulnerabilities? Well, we can throw all our computers away, all our infrastructure. That would be one way. but we need reliable replacements, and nobody can guarantee that new fixes are really out there and are really working. So we need to find software solutions. So the question I ask myself is, can we fix this by using software? And I did some research how software can fix hardware errors. And this is where I landed. What I found, the Hubble telescope. When they sent the Hubble telescope to space in the mid-90s, they used a wrong mirror. So millions of dollars just fired away because there is a wrong mirror in this telescope. The data is completely useless. Well, what did NASA engineers do? The error is constant, so they wrote software that fixes these errors. So we can expect that software can fix and prevent hardware attacks and hardware vulnerabilities. As I said before, remote attacks are possible. However, the attacks still have, luckily, some limitations. First of all, they are very difficult. Many of these attacks just work under laboratory conditions, and typically, usually in an average company network, normal attack vectors, conventional attack vectors like buffer overflows and all that stuff, you guys know about these, are much more easier. So, and via the network, how do they work over network? Just under laboratory conditions. Not really reliable. You need a 10 gigabyte line and everything directly connected. The timing behavior must be really predictable and really constant. But however, it works. And the second factor is it's really, really slow. Only 15 bits per hour on average. But still, in a local network or via a very constant internet connection, we could extract a 256-bit key in about 17 hours. So that's not really exactable. And luckily, there are mitigations on the way. Operating system vendors, in this case, Mac, Windows, Linux, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, just any operating system that you expect to be used in a company, implemented mitigations for some of these side channel attacks and covered channel attacks. And some of these mitigations are not in the operating system, but in the microcode of the CPUs. So there are firmware updates, which sometimes needs special handling, because not every operating system does apply them automatically. Windows Update and Mac updates do them, so in these cases you're safe. But on servers, for example, you need to be really careful that you, when updating the software, that you enabled microcode updates. So a short overview about all these attacks and available fixes and how they work. I'm not going through all of them in detail, but all these, which are orange, are not really reliable fixes or have serious performance issues. For example, the Spectre V2 attack, there is a really good defense, the Red Poline defense developed by Google. That's really, really a great defense, and Google used it way long before Meltdown and Spectre were known publicly, because Google knew about these vulnerabilities before, and they tested it for half a year. And it perfectly works in the Google Cloud, but Microsoft tried to adapt it for Windows and didn't manage to implement it stable, and on Windows it has just about 30% of performance impact. So this is the reason why it's not yet implemented in Windows, in the Visual C++ compiler or C compiler. And still, even though we have many defenses, we can't really know what else we must expect, because side channel attacks are have not been considered in the design of modern CPUs, we must expect that more of such attacks will come. So again, don't trust the memory. So how do CPU vulnerabilities work? First, some basic terms. There are two important types of attacks. The first one is side channel attacks. What is a side channel attack? It's a passive attack, just extracting data in some way that is not intended. One example is observing the caching behavior, is something in the cache or not, or even acoustic analysis. So you can really literally listen to CPUs and based on the acoustic information you get, extract the keys. Of course, in such cases, you need to be physically at the location you want to attack. But I could listen to all your CPUs, and if you're right here, and I might be able to extract some keys from here at the stage. I don't do it, don't worry. And the other type of attack is a covered channel. The huge difference between side channel attacks and covered channel attacks is that covered channels are active. So you abuse some computer system to get information via a channel that is not intended for data communication or for data transfer. A classical example is a Trojan horse, where some attacker loads data or sends data in a way not intended by system administrator or by the people who operate that system. And the bad thing is you can craft, from side channel attacks, you can craft covered channel attacks which allow to extract data. Another basic, how do they work in detail? Most of you guys here know that's a CPU and the RAM module, and they are connected via a bus. And before the CPU can do any operations on the data, it first must to address the data so that it can be loaded from RAM, and then it's transferred into the CPU, and operations are done on the data in the CPU. And of course, it's very efficient to cache data that is operated in the CPU. Caching means that frequently used data is stored in the CPU, so it's not necessary to load it from the RAM module. A classical example for caching is salt, like you have in your kitchen, because you use salt frequently when you cook, and you don't run to the supermarket each time you add salt to some meal you cook. So it's cached in your kitchen. As I mentioned before, hyperthreading is one of the features that make modern CPUs so effective and so fast, but still vulnerable. I'm going to give you a high-level overview about hyperthreading. So imagine a single-core CPU where just one process can run at once. So one process is executing with some instructions, and the CPU processes these instructions. However, because only one process is allowed, there are many parts of the CPU which do not work during these instructions. They are idle. So what is hyperthreading? It's a virtual implementation of two CPU cores, so the operating systems can send two processes at once, but just in one CPU. And obviously, this improves the usage of the other CPUs parts, which are not needed to process the data from process one. So they can be processed at once using only one core. But yeah. So the bad thing is, if process 2 is malicious, it can trick the CPU to access the data from process 1 This is basically why hyperthreading is a threat for modern CPUs, because one process can spy on each other. I'm going to explain this more in detail, but first I'm going to explain speculative execution, the other attack vector and base for side channel attacks and covered channel attacks like we know them today. So again, process 1 is executing on one CPU with just a single core. And you might have noticed the difference at that slide. There are some instructions missing. The CPU is idle because some data has to be loaded or because it needs to fetch instructions from somewhere else. So it has no information to process. So what does the CPU do? When hyperthreading is enabled, it processes another process, and they run next to each other on one single core, using all the instruction and operation units that are available. So in order to fill that gap here in process 1, where nothing is executed, and obviously everything is stored in the cache of these two processes. So what does the CPU do in order to fill that gap? It speculates, it guesses, and it observes what operations are done during the execution, and so it executes them speculatively. And in case it was wrong, it just throws the results away, and like nothing happens. But in general, speculation helps to make modern CPUs really efficient and really, really fast, because we just can guess what we're doing. A real-world example for this is, consider a door, your door at home. You are used to it that it's usually opened, so you don't fetch in your pocket and get your key out every time because you're used to that it's open. So you just open the door, and in the second step, when you noticed, it's closed, which is seldomly the case, then you do the cumbersome process of fetching your key out of your pocket. So this is basically the same what modern CPUs do. So, and again, if there is one malicious process, they can trick the CPU in a way that it predicts false data that should not be processed, and to access data that really should not be accessed. So obviously then the CPU speculatively fetches some data that is not intended to, and it gets loaded into the caches. And from the caches, our malicious process 2 can extract the data again. So take a sip of coffee or something, because we're going through Meltdown right now at a higher level. The base for Meltdown is the same as for almost all Spectre attacks, because the first thing when I saw about these, when I read through these papers is, okay, we have data of a foreign process in the cache. We have a reproducible way to get foreign data in the cache, but how to extract it from the cache? So the first step is we access data at an illegal address, the data we want to extract. And speculatively, this code gets executed because all the memory accesses before were just regular, and for this reason the CPU thinks there is the next instructions and the next fetch instruction will be legal as well. So it just executes them. Once we have that data loaded into the CPU, we craft a memory address from that data, from the secret data. This is just done by shifting it 12 bits to the left. So we then have a memory address that depends on the data we want to extract on the data of a foreign process. So then we load this address A, which we constructed from the data we want to address, and our program crashes. Why? Because the CPU noticed, there was an illegal memory access. I have to end this process immediately. However, you can work around these memory checks. The most common and intuitive way is to do many forks of the process. So the parent process dies, but all the child processes continue to execute. There are other very sophisticated ways using features of some specific CPUs, but the fork model works on most operating systems. And then we probe the access time to the data A to learn if it is cached. Remember, A is the data stored at the location with address A is in the cache because we loaded it, and the address A depends on data we want to extract. And then we iterate some part of the memory and probe if this address A is in the cache. And if it is in the cache, we know we just accessed that address A and see and learn that it's in the cache. So all we need to do then is to reconstruct the data D by using address A, because A depends on the data D we want to extract. So we just need to undo the shift operations and have the original bytes again. And you can do this in total with Meltdown to read the whole memory in about 500 kilobit. So really per second. So that's really, really fast. So how can you protect yourself against CPU vulnerabilities? As always, apply security updates. I really must stress that, like every security researcher, and really make sure that microcode updates from Intel, from AMD, from ARM are also applied. And again, don't trust the memory. When you keep secrets into memory, there might be some side channel and covered channels attacked that we don't know yet. So the best way is to get rid of critical data in memory as fast as possible. Of course, that's not always possible. Imagine a web server with many, many accesses with implementing HTTPS. Of course, the key has to be in memory, but in case of an SSH server, for example, where you just log in one day, it's possible to unload the key from memory until the next time you log in. So in the meantime, it cannot be extracted from memory. This is actually what SSH does. So, and for programmers, overwrite critical data as soon as possible. How to do that? In C, there is a function from OpenBSD, but it's also available in the GNU libc and therefore on Linux, and FreeBSD implements it as well, which guarantees that the data vanishes from memory, or at least it tries to guarantee that, because there might still be some stuff or some parts of the data hidden in some compiler optimizations or on the stack or somewhere on the heap. But at least for GCC and for CLang, it can really guarantee that this data is overwritten as fast as possible by this C function. In Java, Oracle recommends to override passwords using character arrays. Every proper Java function which is dealing with passwords returns jar character arrays, byte arrays, and not objects. Why? because with a character array, you don't have the overhead of objects all around, so just the data that can be one by one translated to binary data into the assembly. So when you're a Java programmer and dealing with passwords, use character arrays and override the password, zero it as soon as you don't need it anymore. This is also what Oracle recommends. For Python, Go, and other languages, there are not really solutions. Why? Because strings are immutable and cannot change, and when you override them, there is a copy done immediately. And the rest of the old string is taken care of by the garbage collector, which can be triggered manually, but you can't get rid of it immediately. It might be still bad enough for a side channel. So there is not really a good solution for this at the moment. Yeah, this was already the first part. I on purpose left some time for questions, which I'm very happy to answer. Yeah, I already see a question.
I didn't got the part about how the data translates to the address and address back to data. I know it's shifting by 12 bits, but why? What's the underlying relationship between the two?
Okay, I have some backup slides for these for that. That's the assembly code of Meltdown. So we have one huge array of the size, page size times byte size. So imagine, like usually the page size is 4K, 4 kilobytes, and you're extracting 1 byte. So page size 4096 times 286, the 8 bytes. And then you access the the data, shift it, and load that data to that array, to that huge array, and by the index of the array, you can conclude back to the data that is in the byte, because it's really for each possible value of the byte, there is one array. Does this answer your question?
So basically, I have to pre-fill this memory area before?
No, it must be empty, so you can probe which one is not zero.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we can discuss this later on. It's tough and it takes some time.
Thank you. There are any other questions? So, you raised first. You are the second one.
So there are so many servers which are running and have a lot of uptime. So can those batches or microcodes be applied during, or is there a downtime needed for them to?
Unfortunately, yes, because you need, when you update the firmware of the CPU, it's absolutely necessary to reboot the operating system, because you cannot really change, or you cannot easily change the instructions for the operating system during runtime. That's unfortunately not really possible.
All right. We have another one here.
Hi. I saw that in your slides you referred about hyperthreading.
Yes.
Is that all symmetric multi-threading or just the Intel implementation? Because the AMD, IBM also have symmetric multi-threading actually.
It's not really multi-threading, but it's the simultaneously operation of two processes in one core. So the problem is that they share one core. And it really depends on the attack which CPU is vulnerable. For many attacks that are just work on Intel architectures, but some just work only on ARM. So you really need to depend on the specific CPU. And from my experience, I can tell that most researchers focus on Intel because Intel is huge and larger than AMD. So I wouldn't expect to be safe with ARM just because there are less vulnerabilities found.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have some questions. So we have this gentleman here, then that one, and then there. Okay. So I will ask my colleague to help you, so if you can help that one. So, where is it? Oh, no. Who was it? Sorry.
Okay. So how about the cloud infrastructure? Is vulnerable to this kind of attack? So I'm just wondering, you mentioned here that Google mitigates somehow the Meltdown attack. How about the Amazon or other cloud provider? Do they have this solution in place for such as attacks?
Well, Google has for their infrastructure, yes. The others, I'm not so sure. It depends. Many of these attacks don't really work reliably on virtual CPUs. So if you're at some cloud provider using virtual hardware, the timing behavior is different, and it might be more sophisticated for attackers to learn that. But for the host machines that host all the virtualization stuff, they need microcode updates and therefore downtime. So there is not really a fix I'm aware of. I mean, there are ideas, but there are not really solutions for existing infrastructure without downtime. Does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So from your description, I guess it should be enough to turn off hyper-threading. So instead of having 8 threads, I would be back to 4 threads because I have 4 physical cores. Is it really enough to prevent these attacks?
Not any kind of attack, but some. But as a result, for OpenBSD...
What's the scenario for attack between the physical cores? How can this even happen?
This can happen because on typically x86 CPUs, the L3 cache is shared among all CPU cores. And therefore you have the vector. L1 cache and L2 cache are per CPU. There is no way I'm aware of where you can extract data. But if you manage to get the timing and wait until the cache data goes back to level 3, to layer 3, then you can also access it from another CPU.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You said about some fixes in the compilers.
Yes.
How that will help? Do you recommend the latest compilers? What if the application is compiled with the latest version of compiler and the attacker is using, of course, an application compiled with an older version?
Well, the compiler protections protect the software that was compiled with that software. So the threat model is always that the attacker can do with his compiler or her compiler whatever they want. So in this case, the compiler fixes just protect the software that is compiled with it. Does this answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I was interested mostly in if it deserves to compile the application with the latest compiler.
Yes, that's in general a good idea, but you really have to be focused on the flags where you translate it. I'm not sure if the REDPO line defense I mentioned before is already in the default implementation of any compiler. There are patch sets, of course, yeah, but I'm not sure, and it's definitely not enabled by default because it's still not well tested.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you have a question. Okay.
Hi. So suppose you have many VMs on one machine. Can you read the memory of one VM through another?
If they get physically executed on the same core, then yes.
No problem.
Well, it's not that easy. So remember, conventional attacks are still easier, way more easier, but it's possible. And some of these attacks are also from virtual machine to virtual machine.
Okay, I have almost the same question, but about containers. So it should be more easier, actually, for containers, I think, than the virtual machines, I think.
Yes, because they run on the same kernel and in the same physical address space the operating system uses, and therefore, yeah.
Oh my. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. We had another hand raised there. Okay. So, Manuel, are we good to take 1, 2 more questions?
Of course,
yeah,
of course.
Okay.
As long as you have time, I'm here.
Thank you.
From what I understood, you based your attack on speculatively getting the data, computing an address from it, and doing a memory access from it. What guarantees you that you can speculatively execute both getting the data and computing the address and doing the access? So what happens if the CPU rollbacks your instructions before you actually get to do the memory access?
The answer is pretty simple and intuitive. You just try again.
Okay, but how many tries do you do it before you are sure that you have done all the instructions?
Depends on the load and how many processes are running. If there is a huge pressure on the cache and the cache is reloaded and unloaded very frequently and flushed very frequently, and evicted very frequently, then the chances might be less. But if there is an idle system, then the timing behavior is pretty predictable.
Okay.
Does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Okay. Okay. Please.
Do you see hardware solutions coming to market anytime soon, considering a lot of the infrastructure nowadays is, especially for small companies, is shifted around garbage collected languages, which don't have a solution for this?
Yes, I expect that because Intel is huge, and now they are aware of this kind of attack, and it's obviously a new selling factor. So I really expect it, yeah. And there is the latest Intel CPU design already has protections for some Spectre attacks.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the last call. All right. So thank you so much, Manuel, for being patient with our audience and answer all the questions. It was a very interesting presentation. I think you are later on a panel that will approach almost the same subject.
Yes.
So you can find out more later on, like in an hour and a half. So thank you again for being guest of ours.